Hello everyone, and welcome to Xeno Series Staples, something kind of new. I am Luxin, and this is a brand new series to this channel, where I talk about concepts and characters that show up multiple times throughout the Xeno series, and how they evolve from game to game. Why isn't the first video in this series something a bit more significant, like, I don't know, Zohar? Well, I finished Xenosaga 2 this week, and the Xenosaga equivalent of this character does not show up at all in episode 3, so I can actually make this video without having to finish Xenosaga. That's basically the only reason. I wanted to start the series, so I'm starting the series. I'm also most of the way done with the post-game side quest in episode 2. I am only going through Dark Erde Kaiser. I don't have time to grind up for that one GS mission, and I don't have time to figure out strategies and grind up for those last 3 extremely hard super bosses, so we're gonna put that on the back burner and try to get Xenosaga 3 finished before the whole new Xenoblade game comes out. So, there's that. Anyway, back to the main topic of the video. If we go along with the fact that these Xeno games were very close to being Final Fantasy at one point, and since then, the series has sort of evolved to be a sort of counterpart to FF, the Vandam is basically the Xeno equivalent of Sid. While his design and his role in the story may vary from universe to universe, there's always going to be a character with the name, and he'll always be associated with one thing. With Sid, that's the airship. You might think that the Xeno equivalent of the airship would be mechs, but Xenogears and Xenosaga did both have ships that ferry the party around, but the Vandam isn't directly associated with either of those. He's instead known for being a harsh military leader. I'm going to talk about every incarnation of Van across the series in this video, so that will involve spoilers for every Xeno game, except for Xenosaga 3 obviously, and the other Xenosaga spin-offs. So, I know most of you have only subscribed because you're waiting for me to get to the extremely in-depth Xenosaga Freak spoiler discussion. I'm sorry, but that's going to have to wait a bit longer. I hope you can understand. Starting off with the original Vandam from the original Xeno game, Vanderkam from Xenogears establishes the character as a quirky minor antagonist. Yes, it is spelled like it's supposed to be pronounced Vanderkam, but you could argue that it's still pronounced Vanderkam, the U is silent or does something weird to the A. Either way, according to the Japanese, it is supposed to be Vanderkam, and the Xenosaga character has the same Japanese name and is pronounced Vanderkam, so I'm just going to call him Vanderkam here to make it a bit more simple, since there's another different translation name a bit down the line. Anyway, this dude, we can't really tell if he's an Ave military commander or a member of Gebler, but he does seem to answer to Ramses over Shakan, which might suggest the latter. Either way, he's associated with the military force that's occupying Ave right now, which obviously puts him at odds with the protagonists. He first shows up in a scene the party isn't privy to, right before they infiltrate Ave, where it's shown Ramses and Myong arriving at Bledavik. He gets reprimanded by Ramses and demoted because of his over-reliance on a big gun in this age of gear warfare. This is his big personality gimmick. Otherwise, he's a fairly standard, big talk loudly type drill sergeant-y military leader, but his thing is, he does not like using gears, and basically he acts as if he's in a big naval battle despite the fact that he's fighting in the desert against gears, and his big ship guns can't really do much against them. After this demotion, he ends up as the leader of the border guard unit Faye fights later on in the arc. He forces his troops to stop deploying anti-gear weaponry so he can use the big gun on his flagship, which is way too slow to ever hit a gear. Then we get another staple of the character, the rant where he chews out his subordinates. Unfortunately, this one is a bit less iconic and impactful than the rest, which I'm largely going to attribute to the facts that A, it's shorter, and B, most of Xenogears cutscenes aren't voice acted, and it's the fact that most of the Vans get a really hammy voice actor that makes all of those moments so good. Unsurprisingly, Faye destroys the main gun pretty easily by himself, but Vanderkam then pulls out his trump card. A gear-ish, I guess, giant version of those claw game things called Dora, for some reason, that's apparently strong enough to even give Satan concern when he realizes that it was brought out. Still though, Faye and some other generic soldiers do manage to win. However, Vanderkam is then used as an example of Grof's power bestowment ability. He appears and, after asking Vanderkam if he desires the power, and Vanderkam's like, yeah bro, I desire the power, Grof powers up the Dora, causing it to tear through the remaining soldiers, which leads Faye to snap, awakening Id again for his iconic showdown with Bart and the Yggdrasil. We don't see anything of Vanderkam after it cuts away from Faye about to transform, but the Dora is later shown completely scrapped, and this is Id we're talking about, so, you know, it probably didn't make it out of that one. I'm gonna say that this one's dead. Xenosaga Vanderkam is a bit less significant even than the Gears version. His name is identical in Japanese between the two games. I'm just going to chalk it up to the localizers of Xenogears and Xenosaga just chose to transliterate it into the Latin alphabet a bit differently. This version of the character has an almost identical design. The only main difference is that his face marking was changed from a cross shape. They just kind of rotated it 45 degrees, and this one's got an X. It is honestly amazing how much they got away with straight up reusing designs from Xenogears without legal issues. Like, you got Vanderkam, Nephilim looks exactly like a young Ellie, I know there's a young Faye lookalike as well, Erde Kaiser looks quite a lot like G Elements, especially in episode 3, and then there's just stuff like this regular enemy mech in the final dungeon of episode 2 that looks exactly like Crescens, and wow, it's even called Crescens. So, anyway, this guy works a bit more behind the scenes and doesn't do a lot right in front of the screen. He shows up once berating his subordinates right at the beginning of the game when Xion is walking around the Woglinde and stops her from coming in contact with the Zohar emulator. It looks like he is just some Federation army commander, but he's actually a UTIC agent who's acting undercover, working with Cherenkov to try and secure the Zohar. He does survive the Gnosis attack, but is separated from Cherenkov, and yeah, after that he's not seen at all for the rest of episode 1. He does, however, show up as a boss in episode 2, and I'm gonna tell you, Xenosaga as a whole, at least through the first 2 games, has a really, really big problem of there are so many characters, a lot of them are even antagonists, but like half the bosses are just generic Gnosis, generic mecha thing. Like, the final boss of episode 1, there's an albedo fight right before it, so yeah, he's there, but nope, the final boss, the only fight that has a unique battle theme in the entire game, it's literally just some random Gnosis, so there's that. It's Vanderkam showing up completely out of nowhere to be an actual boss that's an actual main character. I am going to take that. He is directly fighting for UTIC out in the open this time, and confronts the party in the city on Old Milsha, using a ship called the Naglfar with a massive cannon, so very similar to the Gears counterpart's flagship. He's never seen in person here, weirdly enough, but this is my personal favorite Van rant. Weirdly enough, there is actually a boss in episode 1 called Proto-Dora that's very clearly supposed to resemble the Xenogears boss, but this Vanderkam does not go anywhere near the Proto-Dora, except in the Xenosaga 1+2 DS remake, where he's piloting that instead of the cannon ship in the Old Milsha fight. Presumably he's killed when his ship is beaten, seeing as how it's the ESs against him and there's no cutscene after the fight, and the cannons just kind of blow up as a final attack sometimes, so yeah, this one probably didn't make it out either. Moving on to Xenoblade Chronicles 1, we have Vangar. This is where the name of the character switches from Vanderkam to Vandam, and unfortunately, the localizers of Xenoblade 1 did not have the hindsight of knowing the character would become recurring, so they did not keep the Japanese name exactly, and went with something similar. It still has the Van, so it still has that through line from Gears and Saga, but instead of being a real name, and possibly referencing Jean-Claude Van Damme, it's instead a pun on the word Vanguard. I would not be surprised, since his name is very rarely said out loud, if Xenoblade Definitive Edition retcons it and just changes his name back to Van Damme. He's first seen in Colony 9 as the Colonel of the Defense Force, once again berating his subordinates for their mistakes, and yeah, this conversation has a lot of memes in it. Don't need to go past that. There are a lot of other changes from the Vanderkam established norm besides the name though. His design has changed. He looks like this really weird AU Waluigi now, and the future Vandams will change design every single time now. There's no slight change tweak thing anymore. He may be extremely harsh with the punishments he gives his men, and extremely over the top with doing all the drills and stuff, and exploding biceps, 10 million squats around the colony, that sort of stuff. But this version of the character is expressly on the same side as the main cast, making a permanent change in the status quo in that Vandams are all good guys as opposed to both Vanderkams who were antagonists. After that, he keeps acting just as you'd expect he would, and one of his punishments is sending Ryan to pick up ether cylinders from Tephra Cave, which leads to the party going there and them not being in town for the start of the Mechon attack. He also leads the defense force against the Mechon during the attack and is seemingly killed. He's actually the first person to try attacking Metalface, and he's even the first one to point him out as being different from other Mechon. He specifically refers to him as a Mechon with a face, so technically, Vanguard is the one who coined the term Face Mechon, and after that everyone else, including Egil, just kind of rolled with it, so he's got an amazing legacy even if he did actually die there. Of course, he isn't dead. Metalface is apparently not really that good at killing people in that first attack. Maybe it was his first time out in general, so that would make sense. And he later shows up to lead the Homs contingent into battle when the Bionis allied army thing attacks Sword Valley for the second time. He appears again in the ending as more comic relief shenanigans, which, I mean, they're funny, but are they even necessary? Like, you have Ryan and Ricky on screen at the same time. I think that's enough. This is also the first time where the Van Man gets a foil of sorts who's on the same rank as him. You could argue that Ramses and his actions toward Xenogears Vanderkam was some sort of thing like that, the sensible commander versus the wacky one, and Cherenkov Vanderkam and Xenosaga could sort of be a thing too, but that's dropped in episode 2 when Vanderkam actually shows up again and is fought. But anyway, Atharon is Vanguard's counterpart in Colony 6, and tends to actively disagree with his gung-ho methods when they have to work together, and that's interesting. Moving on to Xenoblade X, we have Jack Vandam. Blade Commander and Supreme Commander of the Defense Force of the Colony of New Los Angeles, Brigadier General Jack Vandam. Yes, anyway. This is the biggest role that any Van has had yet. If it weren't for X's massive playable cast, the fact that he's one of the most significant supporting NPCs would make him a top 10 most important character in the game easy, and even then, he's probably in the top 5 most important non-villain NPCs. The White Whale was basically a Star Trek ship, and Vandam had the fittingly vague position of Chief Engineer. He does retain the square tash of the previous incarnation, but instead of having purple hair, a lot of his features were inspired by Dixon from the previous game, who was basically Hulk Hogan already, so we have Hulk Hogan 2. This is why you should play X, people. He is one of what I like to call the big 3 of NLA alongside Kentaro Nagi and Maurice Chosan, and out of the 3, while he's technically the least important overall to the city, he is the one the party most interacts with on account of being the leader of Blade. He never fights personally, but he is a solid military commander and leader, and is pretty good at politics. He also seems to be the most outwardly kind to his subordinates yet. He's willing to admit to his mistakes, and even compliment people, but he isn't above being hard on someone if they truly need to learn a lesson. He also doesn't seem to go for the physical abuse too often, instead just being snarky or trolly, and or just, here, go on this symbolically important mission, you will learn lesson by the end of it, I promise. Not really sure how he got military command out of being an engineer, but he's not bad at it, and he's a cool, reasonable authority figure in a game chock full of them, so I'm not really complaining. He also probably gets the most character exploration so far, because several affinity missions are technically Vandam affinity missions. And there's even one where we just see how hard he has to work every single day, and everyone's like, wow, I respect him now. Moving on to Xenoblade 2, we have the final Vandam to date, Aquila Parade Sola Stereo. Well, It took 3 Final Fantasy games after Sid was introduced in order for him to become playable, so obviously it would happen to the Van eventually, but it took Xeno 5 universes for him to become playable, and even then, yeah, he wasn't exactly a permanent party member, was he? Vangar definitely bucked the trend of the Van Man dying. Vandam in X was never really in danger, but hey, Xenoblade 2, let's bring in a bunch of things from across the entire Xeno series, including killing off our Van Man when he's like probably one of the more likable ones, so good job, game. This time he's got a scar on his face. It's an X shape, so I'm going to call that a reference to Xenosaga Vanderkam's tattoo, and he is the driver of Rock, who has a rather square, tashy organization of feathers on his face, so somehow he brings together design elements from across the series, despite being the first non-human Van Man. Like, yeah, human is used as a blanket term for Ardanians, Orions, Leftherians, that kind of thing, but he is Orion, and if it was any other fantasy universe, he would be considered non-human, so yeah, he's the least human looking out of all of them, even if he is technically human. He also combines the whole being an antagonist and being an ally thing too. He first shows up as seemingly yet another person trying to capture Pyra when the party is swallowed by the Orion Titan, but he was just testing the party and wanted a chance to fight the Aegis, so he was intentionally playing the bad guy for long enough to get a fight through. After that though, he shows his true colors, and very soon after, offers to take the party to the capital of Araya. As I alluded to before, Vandam is not actually the character's birth name this time, and he is an ex-Orion noble who left the nobility at some point. The other big unexplored thing about his past is his son. We know he had one, and we know he's dead now. My guess would be, in some way, shape, or form, his son's death is what caused him to leave the nobility. Either way, he took on the name of a folk hero he looked up to as a kid and decided to become a merc. He worked with Cole for a while doing some fighting stuff and apparently being really good at it, before eventually founding the Garfont Mercenaries. Most likely motivated by his dead son, the mercs have their own village where they take in war orphans, raise them, give them a place to live, and then see them on their way if they decide to make their own path into the world. He is still harsh, but this is mostly when he's either intentionally playing the villain, or when he's confronting someone who he really hates, like the members of Torna. Even when he's training his men, he doesn't seem to go as ham as even the previous Vandam. And sure, he barks orders in battle like a normal commander would, so that hardly counts either. This time, he takes on the doomed mentor role. He largely acts as the party leader, de facto at least, through Araya, and teaches Rex a bunch of lessons on life, war, what it means to fight, the nature of titans and blades, and of course some combat tips, before ultimately sacrificing himself to try and buy time for the rest of the party to escape. His death is the impetus for Mithra coming out, and she is sort of the id to Pyra's Fae, so even this might be a reference, because this is Xeno. Everything is a reference to something. You just have to figure out which of the 3 categories. Is it religion? Is it previous Xeno game? Or is it other sci-fi series? You have 3 choices. It is very easy to figure out most of the time. Anyway, I think a lot of people agree that this Vandam is a bit of missed potential. Not necessarily in the fact that he died. I feel like he didn't really have a character arc when even Morag and Zeke sort of do develop. But in the fact that he's almost never referenced again later. Even Rock is never referenced again later, and he comes back as Rex's other blade. Like, Rex never mentions fighting his own war again, and I feel like that's one of the biggest missed opportunities of Xenoblade 2. But yeah, that's the end of the video. Let me know what you think about this idea, because my guess would be the next one I do after I finish Xenosaga, of course, would be doing the Katana Man. So that's Satan, Jin, Dunban, Nagi / Lao, sort of, and then Jin again. So yeah, look forward to that probably. There's a bunch of other things I can do, like the Gunslinger, the Zohar itself. There is a character type that I'm going to refer to as the Himbo, and you will see that this is a character type the Xeno series likes to use. So, goodbye.